Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast Everything Product. We talk about latest technologies and various product management concepts. Today, we are going to talk about the most important thing that is needed for a product manager, product roadmaps. So Sidhu, let me start with a simple question. What is a product roadmap?
Sure, Phani. Very excited to talk about product roadmaps, right? Like it's a very near and dear concept for any product manager, right? But before we get into product roadmaps, I would want to talk about three things which are kind of very closely aligned with each other and determines the success of a product, right? And also a product manager manages these three. So the first one is a vision, right? So a vision is the why of the product, right? Like where you want to get to. Then you have the strategy on how you want to get to, right? Like what is the strategy? Then you have the roadmap, which is the when of the product, right? Like when are you going to do implement that project strategy to get to that vision? So I would say all these are interlinked with each other. So you have to kind of get all of these three right to have a successful product out for the customer. So I'll start there and then now getting to the actual definition of what a roadmap is. A roadmap is a plan of action on how a product or a solution would evolve over time, right, sir? Or putting it in a very simple term, it is incremental value which you are providing to the customer, right, through a product. So that's a roadmap as simple as such.
See it the same way as well. Like a roadmap would clearly show you how you would be achieving your strategy or the eventual vision that you have for the company. Like it would clearly lay out a step by step plan. I'm sure it's going to change, but a tentative step by step plan on how you plan to go there. Sidhu, I keep hearing this, right? That the most important thing that a product manager delivers is a product roadmap. Do you feel it the same way?
Yeah, funny. I think that's the only piece of artifact which you have in your hands to communicate value to your stakeholders, right? Get an alignment with your stakeholders, right? Start a discussion saying, okay, this is what I want to do to get to the vision I want to for the product. And this is also something which you can show your team to motivate them, right? So, like we have so many things planned down the line, and that actually excites the team to work on the product, which maybe barely nothing to start at the starting point, right? So I think these are all the different things where you can drive a lot of actions towards getting to that vision you want to using the roadmap. Like what do you think? What was your experience using roadmaps?
Yeah, absolutely, Sidhu. So I see it the same way as well. Roadmap has helped me like tremendously in several different aspects. The very first one, like you mentioned, is being able to clearly define how I envision the overall goal for the product, and clearly laying it out to say, hey, in the next 1 year or so, we'll be going from X to Y, and this is how we are going to achieve that. Another big thing that this that a roadmap really helped me is defining what team do I want. So for example, let's say if I'm planning to work on some AI and ML related initiatives probably in the next 2 to 3 quarters, then I would want to like give that heads up to my leadership to say, hey, this is how I'm envisioning my staffing to be. Or let's say if I'm planning to do some data related initiatives, then I would want to have like analysts that can be helping me in terms of some of the. So laying out this plan to my leadership to say, hey, this is how my staffing needs look like, is something roadmap really helped me as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I also feel that right sometimes you have a lot of different things which you think you have in place, right? Like where you maybe have a list of backlog items, you might know what the strategy you want to do, right? Like what are the problems which you want to solve and all of that stuff. But once you put all of these things into a roadmap, I think that's when you see things connected to each other and see all get to know what the dependencies are and can you get it or not and see if this can be done or not and all of that, right? So I think visually seeing that would get us to asking more questions and make it more and more better. I never saw a roadmap which is like the best and the perfect in the first iteration, right? You do it once, you talk to people, add their ideas, and do it multiple times, and you get to a spot where it is agreeable to everybody, right, on both sides. Let's say.
There is a funny analogy I heard, Sidhu. So, our roadmap is outdated the moment you create it. The
Absolutely
reason for
true.
that, right?
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah, you create something, next day you figure out something else, and then it'll be like, okay, I have to change it once again. But it gives an overall thought process of where the team will go. Cool. Sidhu, let me ask you one more thing, right? I'm sure in your career of a product manager or a product leader now, you would have done road mapping like hundreds of times. So, can you give me the steps that you typically follow to create a roadmap?
Sure. Yeah, before I get started, Funny, so this is a disclaimer. So this is the way I would follow, but it changes by company and the person who's doing it, and also the maturity of the product and all of there are a lot of variables into it, right? So Funny might have a completely different answer than what I have, but this is something which actually worked for me. So I'll maybe lay it out and see how what everybody thinks there.
No,
So
Sidhu, I'm gonna keep you accountable for this. Okay.
sure, 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 Funny. Yeah. So maybe I think Funny. Before, right, like I think the first and the foremost step for anything, right, even to get something onto our roadmap is uh, figuring out what the problems you want to solve are, right? There are multiple different avenues where you can get these problems from: interviews, observing people, it could be focus groups and all of that stuff. So I'd say once you have all of this plethora or the list of problems, then you go in and figure out like which one are the top pain points of the user or the persona which you are targeting or creating the product for. So that could be based on the intensity of the pain or the frequency of the problem which happens. Then you pick like the top two or three problems which you want to solve for, and then the next phase is basically ideation, right? Ideation could be you grabbing all the stakeholders or just your team into a room, trying to figure out how you are going to solve the problem, right? And I would say whenever you do ideation, the best way to do it is create multiple solutions for the problem you have, because I always believe that the first solution is not always your best solution, right? You do create multiple solutions, and as a group activity, right, you then look at how much time it would take for each of these solutions, how feasible is it, and how valuable is it to the problem which you're trying to do, and all of that stuff. Once you do that, then you get into a list of things which you could do, right? That's like a long list of backlog, I'd say. From there, you get on to a shorter list, which are priorities which you could tie back to your initiatives or the vision which you're trying to do. That's when you pick this shorter list and then prioritize and then put them onto a roadmap. So that's how you kind of shape up the overall roadmap, right? And the priority could be, right, there could be low hanging fruits which you want to get done now, or there could be bigger bets you want to take on a longer time, which might add significant value to the product. So it might vary, but I'd say these would be some of the steps which I would follow to end up with a roadmap for a product. Yeah, now repeating the same question to you, Fanny. So, like, what are the different steps you follow, and how do you end up with the roadmap for a product?
If you have watched our video for so long, I hope you guys are enjoying all the topics that we are discussing. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
So at the top level, it's more of like a vision and strategy. From there, you get on to like all the problems which you want to solve, then pick what the top ones, and then get to a space where you prioritize all of these problems into different quarters based on the value they add, or all of the goals which you have with the product and all that stuff. Yeah,
That's
very
true.
very well put together. But I'd say roadmaps, kind of the process vary based on the type of the product, right? So maybe what we are talking about is a B2C product, right, where you talk to customers and all. But sometimes when you look at a roadmap, the process for the roadmap of a B2B product, it might be completely different, right? So previously, when I was working for a B2B company, right, sales had a lot of say in the roadmap, because there was significant chunks of revenue that was coming up uh, for a specific feature in the product, right? Which was maybe if imagine your revenue is 100 million, and you get a customer who comes to you saying, we need a specific feature, and we give you like 20 or 25 million, sometimes you have to include those into a roadmap. Sometimes there could be other stakeholders who might have higher priority on the list of features you have. So I think, yeah, the what I intend to say is like the process might look completely different for the kind of product.
So if someone is coming and giving me 25 millions, I'll put my entire roadmap with their features only, Sidhu.
With the features. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I think it's a very thin balance, right, Funny? Sometimes you also don't want to harm the longer good of the product, right? Sometimes, but yeah, it's balancing, right? You can't just sink your ship, right? When it's a startup, by saying I can't take the money and I'll do just what is good for the product. Sometimes, right? Yeah, you have to
That is true.
balance that out.
That's true. And very well said, Sidhu. Especially like whenever you have enterprise customers, right? Your roadmap might be driven a lot by them, given that they might be bringing like large volumes of customers to you, or they might be bringing large volumes of calls to you. Like if you're a platform, you basically look at how much your platform is being used by customers, right? So enterprise customers would be the bigger chunk of it.
Curious, right? So funny, you were working on a lot of platform teams before, right? In Intuit. So I'm assuming sometimes your roadmap also helps other teams to, come to you to communicate like what they would want to include, right? Based on their priorities. Like, does that also happen a lot?
Not a lot. It happens like every day.
every day, someone or the other is like, "Hey, Funny, can you put this into your roadmap? And can you do this for us?"
I'll
Right?
be super honest, right? 60 to 70% of the roadmap is typically driven by what other teams need. And that's what platform product manager typically gets their needs from, right? Like you said, you talk to like end customers to figure out a bunch of those things. My end customers typically are the products that are using my platform. I obviously have my end customers as well who are using my product. But my first customer that I would always look at is the product manager who is using my platform.
So you
And
have like a set of requests that come to you, but you take the call on prioritizing and which is good for the product and all of those things, and then maybe communicate back and do that negotiation with those teams who want those features, right?
that is correct. So, best example is, let's say Mint comes with some requests, and then Credit Karma comes with some requests, and then they basically tell that, hey, by doing these initiatives, it's gonna be beneficial for me, and I'm gonna gain this much revenue in this period of time. So there's a clear distinction to say, like, okay, by doing this feature in Credit Karma, obviously it can scale to Mint as well down the line, but this is going to be obviously very beneficial right now. Another example is TurboTax comes and says, hey, this is a tax season, I need this feature right away. So at that point, it's a tax season. So you basically define your roadmaps based on the criticality of the timelines too. So if it's a tax season, you have to do it. Otherwise, if you do it after the tax season, it's not going to be useful until the next tax season.
Yeah, and you kind of also ask a lot of questions to get these answers, right? So I think typically a job of a product manager is to say a lot of no's than yeses, right?
That is true. And you have to do that. Otherwise, you would be building a roadmap that is of minimal need from the customer rather than building something that is like really useful for the customers.
So it'll be a feature factory or a wish list of everybody's wants, right? Rather than a
And you will
product
never
roadmap.
have capacity.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you will never have capacity to do any of those. Yeah. Cool. Let's start with the first step that you're talking about, Sidhu. The very first step that you mentioned is talking to the customers, right? So I know your product is primarily like, I mean, think of Best Buy. Best Buy is typically like B2C. Like, how do you typically do this to get the customer needs?
Yeah. So I think there are like a couple of different ways of doing it, Funny. So, the luxury of being an e-commerce website is, right, what the actual action is happening on the website itself, right? The person, uh, you know, wh- at what spot he's entering and what is he looking through and how much is he adding and right, what are the actions he's taking and is he coming back again to look at the product and all of that, right? So you know a lot of user behavior through the analytics itself. So that's one way of gathering all the user needs, I'd say, and pain points. So there's also focus groups which you can conduct, right, where there is a specific segment of customers. Maybe let's assume that there is a customer who is only focused on buying appliances, large appliances, right? Kitchen appliances at Best Buy. So you want to solve for that customer and make it really easy for him to shop these appliances, right? Then you'll have a focus group of people with this specific persona, and maybe you will go and ask them questions on what pain points are. And people might be saying, right, yeah, sometimes I kind of order large appliances, but I'm not sure if it actually fits in your kitchen or not, right? So that's a problem you need to solve. Like, can you maybe give them enough information so that they can measure and see if actually it actually fits even before coming in, or can you maybe have a feature in your app which kind of does a 3D projection in a room which shows if the appliance is fitting inside or not, is it too big or not, and all of that. So these could be typical problems which customers might have, right? So that could be done through focus groups. Also, sometimes you observe uh, on how people come in and shop, right? What questions they ask while shopping, right? And all of that. So these could give us indications of what are the pain points of the customers are.
Got it. Sounds good, Sidhu. That makes sense a lot.
So
Um, uh,
let me ask the same question to you, Fanny. Like, imagine you were doing this into it, right? Like, what are the different ways you get that information?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, the very first one is data for sure. The way we gather the data varies a lot based on the product and based on the company. So, the way we gather the data is um, we have feedbacks and surveys like at different points of the product. So, whenever a customer likes what they did or doesn't like what they do, they have a chance to like give a rating and give some comment on what they would like in the future. That's a wealth of data that we get from the customers. And another thing is customer support calls. So we keep going back to our customer success and customer support teams to see like what the customers are telling, and we keep doing sessions of like listening to the customer recordings or going through the chats and stuff that clearly tells what the customers are anticipating versus what we are delivering. um, and I do a lot of interviews too. But if I think about the scale of initiatives that I get from the feedback, where I get from like from the actual data or the customer support versus the interviews, I would always go to the first. But we do a lot of customer interviews as well, typically to validate whether we are doing is a good thing for the customer or not.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go to the next step. So you said once we identify the problem, then you'll probably like identify the solutions that you want to build for each of these problems, right? How do you do that?
Yeah. So for ideation sessions, right, I love to do it in a design thinking fashion, Funny. So what you do is kind of you have a problem statement at the start of the exercise of the workshop, and by the end of the workshop, you have a bunch of solutions which you pick one solution out of it to say this is what we want to implement. But when we look at the process of how you do it, you clearly define what the problem statement is, and you bring in a bunch of stakeholders, or so stakeholders would be engineers, right? Engineers would be there, engineering manager would be there, there'll be a product person. If it's a B2B, there could be sales, client services, or there could be also anybody who's sponsoring the project and all of that stuff, right? So what you do is, I'd say this again varies for a ideation of a completely new product and ideation of a feature. For ideation of a feature, you might not need all of the people which I mentioned. But for ideation of a completely new product, you need everybody at least who has skin in the game for that specific product, right? So then you kind of do ideation where you come up with multiple different ideas on solving that problem. Maybe to give you an example, right? Let's look at Uber. Uber Eats, maybe. Uber Eats, one of the problems drivers often have is finding the right restaurants, right? So there are like a lot of restaurants in strip malls where you cannot point to the exact place where you want to go to, right? So it will take a lot of time. So if we assume that's a problem, there could be multiple different solutions for that, right? Maybe give step by step directions to the driver, or have an image of the restaurant in the map itself so that he can actually identify the door of the restaurant, or maybe have a voiceover. So these are different solutions. Once you have these different solutions, right, you then look at different criteria, right? Like how easy is it to implement, right? Is it actually solving the problem or not, and is it feasible, and all of that stuff. And then you pick one idea which you want to solve for that problem. That's what gets into the ideation phase. How about you, Fanny?
Got it. Very similar, Sidhu. So there is a process that we used to follow in Intuit as well. It's called Design for Delight. Um, Starts with a similar fashion. Identify the exact customer that you're solving for. Define a clear problem statement of what the customer is trying to achieve and where is he or she failing and what the problems that they're facing while not being able to solve the problem. And then you come up with some hypothesis, and then um, you define the hypothesis to say, hey, if we do this, probably it's going to be beneficial for the customer. Then you build on that idea, like solve all the questions and stuff, and then you continue to create some prototypes, validate those prototypes with the customer if they're available internally. Otherwise, you'll build a prototype and then take it to the customer whenever you can, and eventually you'll identify some of these hypotheses would be true, and then end up building some of those ideas.
Sure, yeah.
Cool. The next one is, obviously you come with like a big list of ideas from this session, right?
Mhm.
What are the different principles that you take to shorten that list from like such a huge list to a small one?
Yeah, I'd say, uh, this works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes, but it's always good to get that popular quote, right? Like have all the list of features which you want to work on, and then make the team vote on the best ones, which are the ones which they think are more valuable, let's say. So that actually gives us a much shorter list of things which we could work on. But I would say that doesn't work all the time, right? Sometimes there could be uh, prioritization, or at least shortening the list down based on the value, or at least the urgency, and all of these factors come in, let's say. But one way of doing it is to uh, get the team to pick the top ones which they want to work on.
Makes sense. Yeah, we do very similar thing as well, Sidhu. Like go through the features. We do voting a lot as well to see like uh, out of, let's say, 10 people who are in the ideation session, how many of them actually feel like this is the important feature that we need to work on. Many times what would end up happening is there might be like big features or the awesome ideas that they would vote, but you'll have to go back and like break it down to say, in order for us to achieve this overall goal, probably I'm going to do like very small test in the
That's right.
first quarter and then continue to build the features and stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, let's say once you have the shortlist, then I think the very next step is prioritization for the quarters. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, very important one, right? Like prioritization. I think this is the most important game you play as a product manager, to say say no to certain set of features and say yes to certain set of features, and figure out like which gives you the most bang for the buck, right? So I think there could be multiple different ways to do it, right? You could use maybe effort versus cost, impact scale kind of prioritization framework, or rice prioritization framework, right? Multiple different things to do that. But I'd say overall, it's again tying back to see, does it align with your vision or not? Is it helping your the ball move towards your vision or not? Or and it's also, is it aligned with your overall goal or not?
Awesome, Sidhu. Yep. I know we did a big video on the prioritization frameworks, right? I'll probably link that video here as well for anyone who wants to watch. Very similar. Yeah. We do like bunch of prioritization frameworks, settle on one from a team standpoint, and then continue to prioritize. So, Sidhu, I know there are like different kinds of product management roadmap templates in the world, right? I've seen a couple of great ones from your newsletter. Would you be able to share one of your templates that you use? If you have watched that video for so long, I hope you guys are enjoying all the topics that we are discussing. So, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
As I said, right, Son, as we were talking about, there are multiple different ways of doing it. There's no right way. The best which suits you and your needs is, the right way of doing it. So this is one way of doing it, right, where you have different initiatives, and for each of the initiatives, you have a specific feature or a value added thing that you implement, and you kind of have the priority, effort, impact, and all of that stuff. Because sometimes when things change all the time, right? You can move things up and down and adjust based on the effort it takes, the priority, and all of those things. So you actually have a visual feel of like how the roadmap is and what the features you're going to implement. So this is one way of looking at it, and there's also another where you all maybe go into much more details of calling out what are the different backlog items which you implement in each sprint, and how does that go, and how does that slide over and all of that stuff. So that's one way. And the one which I was talking about is more of this way where you are saying, this is like a timeline based, but I would differ from having times there, right? I would maybe put it at a broader level, at a quarter level, because when you're working on a sprint and agile basis, right, where you are saying, okay, this might be a solution for the problem, you'll find out different things while you actually maybe experiment and show it to the customer, and you might have to have more time implementing that, or even lesser time implementing that. So I would refrain from having some solid dates on that, but it would basically communicate all the things in a sequence of steps which you are planning to do.
Awesome, Sidhu. Thanks for sharing. Great conversation. So let's end the video with our typical question, right? So if there are two things that you want our viewers to take away, what would those be?
So yeah, sure, funny. So I'd say the first one, first takeaway for roadmaps is, right. I'd say there is no one size fits all solution for roadmaps, right? So do it the way which you would most benefit from, right? Like I have moved from Excel to Miro, so maybe if that suits you, do roadmaps there. So that's one thing which I would say. And the next thing is, make sure you don't treat roadmap as a list of features or wish list, right? So that's kind of detrimental to what you want to achieve through a roadmap, right? And also sometimes roadmaps are too fixated towards timelines, and I'd say avoid doing that. Maybe have it at a broader level, at a quarter level, so that it's easier for teams to focus on value rather than hitting that specific day and creating something that doesn't add value to the overall product.
Takeaway would be to continually work on the roadmaps. So typically, what happens is a product manager creates a roadmap and they don't look at it until the next quarter starts. What I would highly recommend is continually go to your roadmaps every couple of weeks so that anything new that you identify, anything that's fresh in your mind, continue to put it in the roadmap so that you don't lose track of that. And the second one that I would say is try to make data backed decisions. I'm sure like you won't be able to make it for all of them, but whenever you're trying to do something for the next quarter or the next 2 quarters, try to gather as much as data as possible so that you can concretely tell that, hey, this is something that's really useful for our products. Awesome. Love the conversation, Sidhu. Thank you so much for taking time again. And for everyone who's watching, if you want to watch more product management videos like this, so don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Everything Product. Thank you.